The hospital room was a cage of white noise, its hum a relentless reminder of time slipping away. Daniel lay small against the starched sheets, his 8-year-old frame swallowed by the bed's sterile expanse. The TV flickered above, casting shadows that danced like ghosts across his pale face, but his eyes, sharp defiant, stared past the screen. His mother sat in the corner, her smile a brittle mask, her hands twisting a tissue into knots. "I'm still here," Daniel thought, clutching a toy police badge, its edges worn smooth by his thumb. The charity worker's voice drifted in, soft and hesitant, speaking of a wish. Daniel's heart flickered a spark in the dimness, though he didn't know why. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the faint echo of a dog's bark, distant but deliberate, cutting through the night. Beyond the hospital's glass walls, the town crouched under a brewing storm. Rain streaked the cracked sidewalks, pooling in the hollows of forgotten lots, where rusted chain-link fences sagged like old bones. The air smelled of wet asphalt and diesel, a gritty tang that clung to the skin. Streetlights flickered, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to move with a purpose of their own. Somewhere a siren wailed, then faded, swallowed by the low growl of thunder. The industrial district loomed nearby, its abandoned warehouses, whispering of secrets buried in Max's past crimes, unsolved promises broken. The town was a canvas of decay, its edges frayed by the weight of things left behind. Daniel's hospital window framed it all, a storm-soaked world that mirrored the ache in his chest. Daniel's fingers traced the edges of the toy police badge, the plastic cool and unyielding under his touch, like a promise that had turned hollow. Why me? The thought looped in his mind, a whisper he couldn't silence, as the hospital lights buzzed overhead, casting a pallid glow on his thinning arms. He turned his head away from his mother, her eyes too full of pity, too heavy with the goodbye she wouldn't say. Inside, the numbness spread like frost on a window pane, days blurring into nights of needles and beeps, his body a traitor that stole his runs through the park, his laughter with friends. He squeezed the badge harder, willing it to spark some fire, but only a quiet ache answered a silent unraveling where tears refused to fall. His breath hitched shallow and ragged, as if even that was too much effort now. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in with the weight of what he couldn't fight, leaving him adrift in a sea of unspoken regrets. As Daniel's eyelids grew heavy, the storm outside rattled the window, and then it came, a bark, sharp and resonant, slicing through the rain like a beacon in the fog. It wasn't the frantic yip of a stray, but something deliberate laced with purpose, echoing from the parking lot below. Daniel's eyes fluttered open, his grip on the badge loosening just a fraction, as if the sound had tugged at some buried thread of curiosity. What's out there, he wondered. A faint stir in his chest, the first crack in the ice of his isolation. The bark faded, but its echo lingered, a subtle promise that something or someone was approaching, ready to shatter the silence. Flashbacks came unbidden, like faded photographs flickering in Daniel's mind. 2 years ago, under a sun-drenched sky, he had raced through the backyard, his laughter echoing as he played detective with a makeshift magnifying glass, hunting clues in the grass. His body was strong, then a whirlwind of energy, climbing trees and dreaming of badges and chases. But the illness crept in like a shadow at dusk, first a cough that lingered, then nights of fever that stole his breath. Doctor's words blurred into a haze, rare, aggressive, terminal. His mother's face crumpled that day, her hands trembling as she held him, but Daniel had clutched his toy badge tighter, whispering to himself, "I'll solve it like a real hero." Now the memories stung, a stark contrast to the boy tethered to machines, his vitality drained into whispers of what could have been. Isolation wrapped around him, regrets blooming like weeds, the adventures unlived, the friends faded away. He yearned for one last puzzle, one chance to matter before the light dimmed. Daniel's days melted into a monotonous fog, the hospital room a sterile prison where time stretched like taffy. Mornings began with the sharp prick of needles, IV drips humming like distant bees, his arm a map of bruises. He forced smiles for nurses cracking jokes about superhero training. But inside, the numbness gnawed a frozen sea where fear and hope had drowned. Just get through it, he thought, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them like sheep that never brought sleep. Afternoons blurred with tests machines beeping accusations of his body's betrayal, while his mother read stories he barely heard. The routine was armor a defense against the void, but cracks showed in quiet moments, his fingers twitching for the badge eyes glazing over dreams of running free. The room's white walls echoed his emptiness, a mirror to the boy who had withdrawn into silence, clinging to fading sparks of curiosity amid the endless cycle. Max's fur bore the scars of battles won and lost, a patchwork of silvered lines across his flank where bullets had grazed and claws had torn. 10 years old now, his once boundless stride carried a subtle limp, a remnant of that final raid 3 years ago when shadows had swallowed the warehouse and chaos erupted like a storm. He had been Officer Jacobs's shadow, then a German shepherd forged in the fire of police training, nose keen as a blade, eyes that pierced the dark body, a coil of loyalty and fury. Together they had dismantled drug rings, chased down fugitives, Max's bark, a thunder that commanded surrender. But the last case shattered it all, a tip on a local gang's hideout, whispers of corruption threading through the town like poison veins. Max had lunged first, teeth bared, at the leader's throat, but a hidden trap sprung gunfire echoing Jacob's hit, and Max dragged him out, blood matting his coat. The gang escaped the case cold, and Max was retired, deemed too scarred for duty. Now in Jacob's quiet home, Max paced the floors, his gaze distant, ears twitching at ghosts of sirens. Betrayal lingered in his wary stance, abuse from that night, etched in flinches at loud noises, survival instinct honed to a razor edge. He slept lightly, dreams haunted by the scent of gunpowder and failure, his intelligent eyes holding a depth of unspoken pain, mirroring the boy he had yet to meet. In the dim light of Jacob's cabin, Max lay curled in a corner, his breath steady, but shallow eyes half-lidded, as if guarding against the world's intrusions. Across town in the hospital's cold embrace, Daniel mirrored him, small body huddled under blankets, gaze fixed on nothing, both enveloped in a shared void of purpose stripped away. Max's scars ran deep, physical echoes of trust betrayed, while Daniel's were invisible, carved by cells that rebelled and dreams that faded. Yet both carried the weight of isolation, a quiet descent into numbness where survival was mere existence. Their healing would unfold in tandem, subtle at first, a glance across the room, a hesitant approach, each recognizing the other's fractured soul through unspoken cues. Max's tail flicking at a familiar scent of vulnerability, Daniel's hand extending without demand. Trust built in layers like frost melting under dawn's light, their mirrored arcs weaving together, Max's wariness softening as Daniel's courage flickered, mutual presence becoming the anchor neither knew they needed. In this parallel emptiness, they were reflections, two beings discarded by fate yet poised to reclaim life through the quiet power of shared wounds. The rain lashed against the hospital courtyard like 1,000 tiny accusations, turning the pavement into a slick mirror of the churning sky. Daniel's wheelchair creaked forward, pushed by a nurse whose coat flapped wildly in the wind, his small hands gripping the arms as thunder grumbled overhead. There, under a dripping awning, stood Max, fur plastered dark and heavy droplets beating on his muzzle like unshed tears. His eyes, sharp amber pools, locked onto Daniel's with an intensity that cut through the storm's roar, a silent shockwave rippling between them. Jacobs hovered nearby, umbrella tilting against the gale, his face etched with reluctance as Max's ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring at the scent of frailty and hope mingled in the air. The dog's massive frame tensed not in threat but in recognition, his breath visible in puffs that matched Daniel's labored ones. Chaos swirled, leaves whipping past, water pooling at their feet. But in that frozen instant, urgency bloomed Max's presence, a beacon in the downpour. Daniel's heart pounding like a drumbeat against his ribs, the world narrowing to this improbable meeting where danger lurked in the shadows of unresolved pasts. Jacob's mind raced like the storm outside, a torrent of doubt crashing against the fragile shore of compassion. Not this again, he thought. Fists clenching around the leash as Max leaned subtly toward the boy, ears alert. Guilt coiled in his gut, memories of that botched raid flashing gunfire. Max's yelp, the case crumbling like wet paper. Letting Daniel close meant risking it. All the gang's shadows still lingered, and Max's scars weren't just skin deep. Logic screamed retreat, protect the dog, shield the kid from a world too cruel. But Daniel's eyes, wide with quiet plea, tugged at something deeper, a flicker of empathy eroding his walls. Jacob shifted boots, scraping the wet concrete torn between fear's iron grip and the boy's unspoken need. A subtle sign from Max, a low wine-tail's hesitant wag, tipped the scales, shifting his mindset from guardian to reluctant bridge. The rain drummed a frantic rhythm on the courtyard pavement as Daniel's hand extended, trembling like a leaf in the wind, toward Max's damp muzzle. Jacobs froze, his internal storm raging, but the boy's quiet determination, a soft, "Please just once," cut through the hesitation like a knife. Max didn't recoil. Instead, his head tilted slightly, amber eyes meeting Daniel's with a depth that spoke volumes, his breath warm against the child's cold fingers. The touch was fleeting, a brush of fur against skin messy with rain and uncertainty, but it ignited something raw and irreversible. Jacobs exhaled sharply, loosening his grip on the leash, his voice gruff but yielding. "All right, kid, but slow." Max stepped forward an inch, his massive frame a shield against the gale, the imperfect paws slipping on wet stone. Daniel's arms straining but profoundly real, a bridge forged in vulnerability. In that moment, the decision crystallized, commitment blooming from the chaos, binding them in a pact unspoken, yet unbreakable. With the storm easing to a murmur, Jacobs knelt, clipping a spare collar around Max's neck, as if sealing a vow, his hands steady despite the tremor in his chest. "He's yours for the day," he muttered, but the words carried the weight of more an impulsive surrender to the boy's plea. Daniel's wheelchair rolled closer, and he offered a soggy treat from his pocket. Crumbled imperfect, but Max accepted it, gently, lips brushing the child's palm without a snap, his tail giving a single cautious wag. The dog responded with caution, eyes flicking between Daniel and the shadows beyond the courtyard, as if sensing the ghosts of his past stirring. Jacobs watched his reluctance melting into quiet resolve, whispering to Max, "Protect him, old friend." In the aftermath, Care unfolded a blanket draped over Max's back, space given for the dog to settle nearby, and in that fragile exchange a silent bond took root, a promise of healing whispered against the fading rain where pity transformed into purpose. The hospital garden was a patchwork of damp grass and wilting flowers, the air thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth as Daniel's wheelchair rolled to a stop under a canopy of dripping leaves. Max sat several feet away, his massive frame rigid like a statue carved from shadow amber eyes, fixed on the boy with a guarded intensity that spoke of walls built high and unyielding. A low growl rumbled in his throat when the wheelchair creaked, a warning wrapped in thunder, his ears flattening back as if the sound echoed old betrayals. Daniel froze, his small hands tightening on the armrests. "He's like me, scared to let anyone in," he thought, the silence between them stretching like a taut wire heavy with unspoken histories. Jacobs lingered at the edge, arms crossed, respecting the invisible boundary that Max had drawn with his stance, tail still hackles subtly raised. Neither boy nor dog moved closer. Daniel averted his gaze to the ground, tracing patterns in the puddles, while Max's breath came in measured huffs, his body a fortress of fur and muscle. The garden's quiet amplified their distance. Birds chirping distantly, leaves rustling like whispers of caution, each guarding their vulnerabilities. The air charged with the potential for connection, yet smothered by fear. Daniel's heart ached in the hush, mirroring Max's wary vigilance, a mutual standoff where trust was a distant horizon. Hours passed in this frozen tableau, the sun dipping lower, casting long shadows that danced around them like ghosts of past pains. Max shifted once, a subtle paw scrape on the gravel, but retreated immediately, his eyes never softening. Daniel whispered to himself, "I won't push," honoring the space, their silence a shared language of survival, neither daring to bridge the gap first. In the dim glow of that hospital room, where the beep of monitors hummed like a lullaby of fragility, Daniel and Max shared the space like two islands adrift in a sea of quiet suffering. Daniel's fingers fumbled with a water cup, spilling droplets that mirrored the tears. He wouldn't shed his body, a vessel of unspoken agony, bones aching from treatments, spirit frayed like old rope. Max lay in the corner, his flank rising and falling with labored breaths, a fresh scratch from the garden's thorns, seeping slightly a physical echo of the boy's invisible wounds. We both hurt without saying, Daniel thought, glancing at the dog whose eyes followed his every move from afar, wary but unblinking like a sentinel guarding secrets. Connection flickered in the silence. Daniel tore a piece of his uneaten sandwich, placing it midway on the floor, not pushing, but offering the scent of bread wafting through the sterile air. Max watched, nostrils flaring, his body tense as stone, but he didn't growl, only observed, his gaze softening a fraction in recognition of the boy's trembling hand. Their mirrored suffering wove threads between them, Daniel's shallow breaths syncing with Max's, both flinching at the nurse's distant footsteps. Then, as Daniel shifted, something glinted, Max's old police tag, half buried in his fur, etched with faded numbers, that sparked a question in the boy's mind, a silent bridge over their shared pain. The hospital room's fluorescent lights buzzed like distant gunfire, casting elongated shadows that danced across the floor as Daniel's fingers brushed against the weathered police tag dangling from Max's collar. The metal was cool, etched with faded numbers that seemed to pulse under his touch, a relic heavy with untold stories. "What's this?" Daniel wondered, his internal voice a whisper of curiosity, piercing the veil of his exhaustion, the tag's rough edges evoking a sense of buried secrets. As he turned it over, a gentle gesture born of innocent wonder, Max's body tensed, muscles coiling like springs beneath his fur, but he didn't pull away, his amber eyes locking onto the boy's with a vulnerability that mirrored Daniel's own fragile hope. In that suspended moment, flashbacks crashed over Max like a tidal wave breaking on jagged rocks. The warehouse loomed in his mind's eye, a cavern of rust and echoes, where the air reeked of oil and fear 3 years ago under a moonless sky. Sirens wailed in the distance, a symphony of chaos as Jacob's voice barked commands. "Go, Max, find him." The gang leader's scent was sharp, acrid like burnt rubber, leading Max through labyrinthine crates stacked like tombstones. His paws pounded the concrete, heart thundering in sync with the adrenaline surge, teeth bared in a snarl that promised justice. But the trap-sprung shadows erupting into flashes of muzzle-fire bullets whizzing like angry hornets, one grazing his flank in a blaze of pain. Jacobs fell a grunt, escaping him, and Max whirled, loyalty overriding instinct, dragging his handler to safety, amid the cacophony of shouts and retreating footsteps. The leader slipped away, a ghost vanishing into the night, leaving Max with the bitter taste of failure, his body-scarred spirit cracked like the warehouse's crumbling walls. The hospital garden transformed under the afternoon sun, its paths winding like veins through a living heart, dappled light filtering through leaves that rustled like whispered secrets. Daniel's wheelchair glided forward, the wheels humming softly on the gravel, his face alight with a rare glow as he clutched Max's tag, now a talisman of adventure. "Let's play detective," he murmured, his voice a fragile thread of excitement, internal monologue racing. "This could be real, like my old games, but with a hero by my side." Max padded alongside, leash loose in Jacob's hand, his ears perked at the boy's tone, body language shifting from guarded to attentive, as if the word detective stirred echoes of his past life. They began with the tag's numbers, a code, Daniel decided, pointing to faded scratches that hinted at coordinates. "What if it's a map?" he said, eyes sparkling like dew on grass, wheeling toward a cluster of bushes where the garden met the town's edge. Max's nose twitched, catching a faint familiar scent clinging to the tag, earthy, laced with old metal, and he tugged gently, leading them off the path. The air filled with sensory symphony, birdsong trilling overhead, the crunch of leaves under paws and wheels, the warm earth smell rising like a promise. Daniel laughed, a sound brittle at first, but blooming into genuine warmth as Max bounded ahead, tail wagging in tentative arcs, his massive frame leaping with a grace that belied his scars. The hospital room at midnight was a cocoon of hushed shadows, the monitor's soft glow painting ethereal patterns on the walls, like whispers from a forgotten dream. Daniel lay propped against pillows, his breath a fragile rhythm, syncing with the distant hum of the building's nightlife exhaustion, etching lines on his young face that no child should bear. "Why does it feel different tonight?" He pondered his internal voice, a quiet current beneath the surface, eyes heavy but alert in the dimness. Max had been a sentinel in the corner all evening, his massive form a silhouette of guarded strength fur still carrying the garden's earthy scent mingled with the sterile tang of antiseptic. Jacobs dozed in a chair by the door, his snores a low rumble, leaving the room to the boy and the dog bound by an invisible thread woven through their shared silences. Then, without prelude, Max stirred paws, scraping softly on the linoleum like a secret unfolding. His amber eyes caught the monitor's light gleaming with a depth that held no wariness, only a profound, unspoken surrender. He rose, muscles rippling under his coat like waves on a calm sea disturbed by an inner tide, and padded forward each step, deliberate, echoing in the quiet, like heartbeats amplified. Daniel froze his hand, instinctively reaching out but halting midway. Is this real? The thought blooming with a mix of awe and vulnerability, his chest tightening as Max closed the distance. The dog's breath warmed the air between them, carrying a faint musk of fur and adventure as he leaned in head, lowering to rest gently on the edge of the bed, muzzle inches from Daniel's fingers. The late-night walk through the town's outskirts was a tapestry of muted sounds, the crunch of gravel under wheels and paws, the whisper of wind through skeletal trees carrying a chill that nipped like forgotten regrets. Peace had settled like a fragile veil over Daniel and Max, their steps synchronized in the aftermath of trust, but the air shifted subtly, thickening with an unseen charge. Max's ears pricked first, swiveling like radar dishes toward the shadows beyond the streetlight's pale pools, his body freezing mid-stride muscles, coiling beneath fur that bristled like frost on glass. Something's wrong. Daniel sensed his internal monologue tinged with unease, glancing at the dog, whose amber eyes narrowed, scanning the darkness with primal acuity honed from years on the force. A low growl rumbled from Max's chest, not aggressive but vigilant, vibrating through the leash like a warning tremor before an earthquake. He barked sharply at a flickering shadow, an alleyway's mouth yawning black, empty to human eyes, but alive with echoes of his past trauma, sense of gun oil and fear from that warehouse raid, ghosts stirring in the wind. His posture snapped, alert tail, stiff hackles raised like spines on a porcupine's stillness enveloping him, as if the world had paused on the edge of revelation. Jacobs tensed nearby hand instinctively on his hip, but Max was the harbinger, instincts flaring before any visible threat, foreshadowing the gang's resurgence like storm clouds gathering on a clear horizon. The environment morphed from serene to charged, subtle tension coiling in the air's crisp bite. Daniel's heart quickening in mirror to Max's, their bond, now a conduit for shared apprehension. The hospital's perimeter wall loomed like a sentinel in the fading dusk, but the fresh graffiti slashed across it in crimson paint-twisted gang symbols from Max's haunted past shattered the fragile peace-like glass underfoot. Max's reaction was immediate. A surge of protective fury, his body lowered into a crouch, lips peeling back in a snarl that reverberated through the air, hackles rising like thorns on a vine defending its core. The dog's eyes blazed with recognition, muscles quivering as if the scent of old enemies lingered on the wind, his growl deepening into a bark that echoed maternal instinct, shielding Daniel's wheelchair like a living barrier. Jacob's face drained of color, his hand flying to Max's collar, but the floodgates burst, panic twisting his features as he shouted, "Get back inside!" His voice cracking with raw emotion, guilt exploding outward like shrapnel from a buried mine. Flashbacks assaulted Jacobs in waves, the warehouse raid, replaying in vivid, visceral detail, the acrid smoke choking the air, gunfire popping like firecrackers in hell. Max lunging through the chaos, only for Jacobs' misstep, a hesitated command to let the leader slip away. Blood on the concrete. Max's yelp piercing the night. Jacob's own wound a burning reminder of failure. It was my fault, he confessed now, voice hoarse, as he dropped to his knees beside Daniel, tears carving paths down his stubbled cheeks, the boy's wide eyes reflecting the storm. I pushed him too hard, got cocky, Max paid for it, retired because of me. The admission flooded out a torrent of shame rooted in that night of violence where loyalty had clashed with human error, leaving scars on both man and dog. Daniel reached out, small hand on Jacob's shoulder, but the officer withdrew slightly, body shaking with withdrawal's chill, the presence of the graffiti, a harbinger of the gang's return, igniting a blaze of regret that consumed him. The abandoned lot stretched like a scarred battlefield under the sodium glow of streetlights, weeds clawing through cracked asphalt as if grasping for forgotten justice, the air thick with the metallic tang of impending storm. Daniel's wheelchair bumped over uneven ground, pushed by Jacob's, whose grip tightened like a vice, while Max padded ahead nose to the ground, tracing scents that twisted his gut with dread. Then the abuser materialized from the shadows, a gaunt figure in a hooded jacket face etched with the same sneer from that fateful raid eyes, lighting with malicious recognition as they landed on Max. "Well, if it ain't the mutt that couldn't finish the job," he sneered voice, a gravelly taunt that sliced through the night, his presence a tangible threat. Muscles coiled for violence, a knife glinting in his hand like a serpent's fang. Max's reaction was primal. An explosion of fury, body launching forward with a thunderous bark chain straining against Jacob's hold teeth bared in a snarl that promised retribution, his eyes locking onto the man with the fire of unresolved betrayal. The standoff crackled with tension, physical and emotional. Jacob stepping between them, his voice booming, "Back off, this ends now," but cracking with the weight of guilt, hands trembling as flashbacks merged with reality, the warehouse's echoes, Max's bloodied flank, the gang's laughter fading into the night. Daniel, heart hammering like a trapped bird, wheeled closer, despite the fear, his small voice cutting through, "Leave us alone," defiance blooming in his frailty, the boy's courage a spark in the darkness. The lot's chaos ebbed like a receding tide, leaving behind the acrid scent of struggle sweat mingled with earth, the distant wail of sirens fading into silence as the abuser was hauled away in cuffs. Daniel's wheelchair sat crooked on the uneven ground, his small chest heaving, eyes wide with the aftershocks of adrenaline. We made it his thoughts, a whisper of disbelief, regret lingering like smoke for the fear that had gripped him. Jacob stood panting, knuckles bloodied his face, a mask of exhaustion as he scanned the shadows, guilt's echo resounding in his silence, the confrontation a catharsis that left him hollow. Max, fur disheveled and breath-ragged, circled once before pressing against Daniel's side, his massive head resting on the boy's lap, a physical anchor in the emotional void. Trust reaffirmed in the quiet. Max's eyes met Daniel's amber depths, conveying a vow without words, his body heat seeping through the chill like a blanket woven from loyalty. Daniel's hand found Max's rough fingers trembling as they stroked the touch, a silent apology for the turmoil, while Jacobs knelt, murmuring, "I'm sorry, both of you," his voice cracking, bridging the separation with a hand on Max's back. Physical distance dissolved, boy, dog, and man huddled close the night's breeze, carrying away the remnants of threat, a promise blooming in the hushed safety forged in shared scars. The moment closed the chapter, their bond anchored deeper mutual protection, a beacon against future storms, regret softening into resolve as stars pierced the clouds overhead. The small town's edges blurred into twilight haze, streetlights flickering on like wary eyes as Daniel, Max, and Jacobs moved toward the safe house cabin, the air thick with unspoken dread that clung like fog. Subtle signs crept in, a crumpled note slipped under the hospital door earlier, scrawled with veiled threats, "Unfinished business." The gang's insignia stamped like a brand. Max's instincts ignited, first ears swiveling at every rustle, his nose twitching at faint scents of strangers on the wind, cigarette smoke and leather echoes of his past raids, body tensing into a coiled spring hackles, rising subtly as he paused mid-step, gaze piercing the gathering shadows. Daniel felt it too, his wheelchair's wheels seeming louder on the cracked sidewalk, heart quickening as birds scattered abruptly from nearby trees, their frantic wings a harbinger of unrest. There, watching his internal thoughts, raced frailty, amplifying the unease, a cough racking his frame under the stress. Jacob's hand hovered near his concealed weapon, eyes darting to alleyways where figures might lurk, his protective stance mirroring Max's watchful prowl, tail stiff, low whines escaping as the dog circled the group's senses on high alert. The environment pulsed with tension, distant footsteps echoing, then stopping, a car's engine idling too long down the block, animal behavior shifting, stray cats fleeing, Max's growls muffled but insistent. The abandoned warehouse loomed at the town's forgotten fringe, its rusted doors yawning open like a predator's maw, the air heavy with the stench of decay and oil that clawed at the throat. The gang's lure had been insidious, a cryptic message promising closure on Max's old case, drawing Jacob's Daniel and the dog into the trap with the false gleam of resolution. Inside, shadows clung to stacked crates like veils of deceit, the dim light from cracked skylights casting jagged patterns that danced mockingly on the concrete floor. Daniel's wheelchair snagged on debris wheels, grinding to a halt as his breath came in shallow gasps, body slumping forward in physical decline, the stress accelerating his illness's cruel grip, face pallid, hands trembling like leaves in a gale. The threat-crystallized gang members emerged from the gloom. Faces twisted in smirks of vengeance, the leader, the same elusive figure from the raid, stepping forward with a gun glinting coldly. "You should have stayed retired cop, and the mutt he's done." Max's growl thundered, body positioning between Daniel and the assailants, but the direct confrontation escalated, shouts echoing off metal walls, a shove sending Jacob staggering, the air charged with the metallic tang of fear and impending violence. Daniel's heart hammered. This is it. His internal cry a whirlwind of terror as one thug lunged, knife flashing toward the boy, the imminent loss hanging like a noose, Daniel's frail form teetering on collapse, Max's scars reopening under strain, Jacob's past mistakes manifesting in this inescapable snare. The warehouse pulsed with danger, every creak a harbinger. The trap sprung tight around them, forcing a reckoning where survival teetered on the edge of oblivion. Tension coiled in the warehouse like a serpent ready to strike the air, thick with the acrid scent of rust and sweat, echoes of shouts bouncing off walls as the gang closed in, their leader's gun trained with lethal intent. Daniel's wheelchair was cornered against a crate, his body racked by a coughing fit that left him gasping, eyes wide with the raw fear of loss. "I can't let them down," his internal resolve flickering like a candle in wind. Jacob's hesitated hand on his holster, guilt's chains binding him, memories of the failed raid flashing the weight of past errors paralyzing, protect the boy or the dog. But Max, sensing the precipice, made the choice first, his body exploding into action, a blur of fur and muscle lunging at the nearest thug teeth, sinking into an arm with a crunch that shattered the standoff. The hospital room settled into a hush, the monitor's steady beeps, a soft rhythm like rain on a tin roof, fading echoes of the warehouse chaos lingering in the air's faint metallic tang. Daniel lay back against crisp pillows, his small chest rising and falling with deliberate ease, color returning to his cheeks in subtle washes as if the ordeal had flushed out some inner shadow. Max curled at the bed's foot, his massive form a quiet sentinel, fur still matted from the fray, but eyes half closed in rare repose, breaths sinking with Daniel's in long, unhurried pauses. Jacob sat nearby, hands clasped loosely, his gaze drifting to the window where dawn's light crept in soft and golden, signaling survival's fragile return. Minimal movement defined the scene. Daniel's fingers twitching faintly toward Max, the dog's ear flicking in response, no rush in their decompression, just the slow uncoiling of tension like a spring easing after strain. Jacobs rose once, adjusting a blanket over Daniel with a gentle tuck, his movements deliberate, voice absent, but presence a balm. The atmosphere breathed peace, sterile scents softened by morning air filtering through a cracked window, emotional pauses hanging in the quiet where words weren't needed yet. Daniel's eyes fluttered open briefly, meeting Max's watchful gaze, a silent acknowledgement of their shared triumph, the crisis's weight lifting in increments, leaving behind a tentative safety wrapped in exhaustion's embrace. Days blended into a steady rhythm in the hospital wing, sunlight slanting through blinds and golden shafts that warmed the linoleum floor, carrying the faint scent of fresh linens and blooming flowers from a vase by the bed. Daniel's strength returned in small waves, first sitting up unaided, his laughter a soft chime as Max followed his wheelchair down the hall, paws clicking in sync, their movements interwoven like threads in a tapestry. The dog's tail wagged now with easy cadence, leaning into Daniel's hand for scratches, for soft underfingers that once trembled, each stroke a sensory bridge, the warmth of life pulsing beneath the rough texture of scars mirroring Daniel's own invisible ones. Healing unfolded, mutually mirrored in their behaviors. Daniel offering bits of his meal hand steady as Max accepted gently from his palm jaws, careful eyes locking in quiet gratitude, the act repeated daily like a ritual of trust. Sensory details enriched the bond, the crunch of kibble, the wet nudge of Max's nose against Daniel's knee, eliciting smiles that crinkled the boy's eyes, his energy surging as if drawn from the dog's unwavering presence. Jacobs watched his own burdens lightening, joining walks where Max trotted between them, a living link, his barks now playful echoes in the garden's green expanse. The garden path unfurled like a ribbon of renewal under the soft afternoon sun, leaves whispering secrets in the breeze as Daniel's wheelchair rolled alongside Max's steady gait, their shadows merging into one elongated form. In Daniel's lap lay the final clue, a weathered letter unearthed from the warehouse debris, its inked words unraveling the gang's secrets, proving their downfall in crisp, undeniable lines. "It's over," Daniel thought, breath sinking with Max's rhythmic pants, the air alive with the scent of blooming jasmine and fresh earth, a sensory embrace of closure. Then the gesture, Daniel whispered, Max, voice, a fragile thread laced with wonder, his hand extending not in command, but invitation. Max halted, ears perking, amber eyes meeting the boy's with a depth that pierced the soul, breath held, then released in a soft huff as he leaned in head, resting gently against Daniel's knee, fur warm and yielding. The motion was intimate, hands trembling in release, eyes locking in silent communion, an emotional breakthrough cascading like a dam's quiet breach. Fear dissolved in that touch, total trust, blooming profound and unspoken, marking rebirth in the simple act of response, a name called, a bond answered.